In this video, I'd like to look at how the Cappadocian Fathers and St Maximus the Confessor treat the relationship between the divine attributes and the divine essence. I will be arguing that on the whole, they reject the identity thesis, which states that all predicates of God are absolutely identical to the absolutely simple essence. On the contrary, while they recognize, beginning at least with St Basil, that our predications of God have real reference, they are not merely mental concepts. The referents themselves are not identical to one another, or to one single absolutely simple reality. I will be drawing substantially on Andrew Radde-Gallwitz's book, Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa and the Transformation of Divine Simplicity, but also on the primary sources of these Church Fathers. Before we can properly evaluate the identity thesis, we need to determine what precisely simplicity means to these Fathers. We ought first of all to turn to their own explicit pronouncements, and for that reason I would turn to Ambiguum 17, in which St Maximus lays out in general terms what he means, writing, "For the divine is completely without parts, because it is completely without quantity, and it is completely without quantity because it is completely devoid of qualities, and is completely devoid of qualities because it is completely simple, and it is completely simple because it is completely without extension or dimension, and it is completely without extension because it is completely infinite, and it is completely infinite because it is completely free of movement, and it is completely free of movement because it is without beginning, and it is completely without beginning because it is completely unbegotten, and it is completely unbegotten because it is completely one and supremely singular above all others, and it is completely one and supremely singular above all others because it is absolutely undetermined, and this is why it is in every respect ineffable and unknown, and why it remains for all who move toward it rightly and with reverence the ultimate limit of knowledge, for the ultimate truth that we can know about it is that it cannot be known." Now clearly each of these definitions is dependent upon the following definition in some respect, with the ultimate culmination of this wonderfully crafted passage being the unknowability of God. That is not, however, to say that these explanations are without meaning. While I do not mean to make an argument from silence here, conspicuously absent from this explanation is any reference to the divine essence being identical to the divine energy in the classical sense of actus purus. Indeed, the simplicity of God is not defined as a lack of distinction, but a lack of extension or dimension, and I think this is significant. We may better understand this line of reasoning with reference to creatures. Angels, for instance, are simple and immaterial beings, but they are not absolutely simple in St. Maximus's terms, because they have a beginning. That is, they are brought into being from nothing, by the will of God. And to be created also means for St. Maximus to be the passive recipient of motion. We have seen in a previous video that coming into being necessarily precedes motion for St. Maximus, so there is no question of creatures being formed out of some pre-existent matter by an eternal mover. God is not a mere demiurge or craftsman, but a creator. Thus I think it is fair to say that there are degrees or kinds of simplicity for St. Maximus, and angels are more simple than humans, being devoid of spatial and temporal extension. However, they are not eternal in the same sense of God, of course, because they have a beginning as creatures. For a more developed explanation of how this kind of simplicity differs from the eternality of God, I would refer the viewer to Father Dimitrios Danilo's discussion of the aeon, or the created age which precedes time, that is, the domain proper to the intelligible beings. Returning to Ambiguum 17, we get an affirmation of distinction between essence and energies, in terms of the attributes of God. If then no being whatsoever coincides in its essence with what is and is called the assemblage of characteristics that are recognized and predicated of it, but to the contrary is something different from these characteristics, to which they all refer, and which holds them all together, but is in no way held together by them, for it is not derived from them, nor is it identical with them, or with anything from among them, neither is it derived from some of them, or from one of them, nor is it to be numbered among any of the things that are, and are said to be around it. If, I say, this is so, then all those accustomed to idle impiety must cease to pounce impudently upon every word predicated of God, and having learned their limits in small matters, they should honour by silence the ineffable reality of the divine essence, which transcends all thought and knowledge. St Maximus is well in keeping here with the Cappadocian tradition, which ran counter to the identity thesis of Eunomius. As St Basil states in his Contra Eunomium, Book 2, if we should understand ingeneracy as part of the substance, then there would be room for the argument which claims that what is compounded from different things is composite. But if we should posit on the one hand the light or the life or the good as the substance of God, claiming that the very thing which God is life as a whole, light as a whole, and good as a whole, while on the other hand we should posit that the life has ingeneracy as a concomitant, then how is the one who is simple in substance not incomposite? For surely the ways of indicating his proprium will not violate the account of simplicity. Otherwise all things said about God will indicate to us that God is composite, and it seems that if we are going to preserve the notion of simplicity and partlessness, there are two options. Either we will not claim anything about God except that he is unbegotten, and we will refuse to name him invisible, incorruptible, immutable, maker, creator, and all the names we now use for his glorification. Or, if we do admit these names, what will we make of them? Shall we apply all of them to the substance? If so, we will demonstrate not only that he is composite, but also that he is compounded from unlike parts, because different things are signified by each of these names. Or shall we take them as external to the substance? So whatever account of attribution they conceive of for each of these names, they should apply the designation unbegotten in the same way. As Andrew Radde-Gallwitz suggests, Basil envisions a set of coextensive properties predicated of the divine substance. The fact that they are predicated of the divine substance rather than of some other concept implies that these terms have an extra mental referent. In other words, conceptualism would be an incorrect interpretation of light, life, and goodness, even though these properties have corresponding mental concepts. Basil and Gregory can speak of the concept, enoia, of the life of God, but the life of God itself is not a concept. This seemingly trivial point is of prime importance for our study. It is all well and good to say that we have multiple distinct ideas of God, that are nothing more than ideas in our minds, devised through conceptualization. Surely this does not violate simplicity, though if Eunomius is right it violates the truth of the ideas. But to say that there are multiple properties of God's simple substance, goodness, light, life, each of which characterizes that substance as a whole, is a significant claim. Are we to conceive of these as actually distinct properties? How do they relate to the divine substance? Basil is less than explicit on this point, so let us begin by analyzing the notion of having a property as a whole. From God's substance is good as a whole, and God's substance is light as a whole, it does not follow either that goodness is identical with light, or that goodness or light is identical with the divine substance. All that follows is that goodness and light are coextensive properties. And Basil's clearest explicit statement on the matter, brief though it is, confirms this. In his late text on the Holy Spirit, he states that goodness of will, which, since it is concurrent with the substance, is considered to be similar and equal, or rather identical in the Father and the Son. The identity claim at the end of the sentence is about the sharing of Father and Son in the goodness of will. That is, it confirms that we are dealing with goodness as a common term, or a logos tes ousias. What primarily concerns us here is St. Basil's claim that goodness of will is concurrent, synthromon, with the divine substance. This is different from saying it is identical with that substance. Basil himself appears to recognize this distinction between concurrent with and identical to in Against Eunomius in the context of discussing Eunomius's doctrine of simplicity. We can gain a better understanding of what Basil means by concurrent with the divine substance if we examine parallel uses of the same phrase in late ancient Greek authors. As we will see, this became a relatively common way of expressing the necessary connection between some substance and its natural activity, power, or property. The use of synthromon, together with the dative of ousia, occurs for the first time in extant Greek literature in two fragments of Alexander of Aphrodisias, which are preserved by John Philoponus. In these, Alexander is commenting on Aristotle's famous discussion of active intelligence at De Anima 3:5. Alexander uses the language of concurrence to describe the relationship of this intelligence to its actuality. Active intelligence has an actuality which is concurrent with its substance. This is proper to God alone. Aristotle does not use the term synthromon for this relationship. In fact, he thinks that the active intelligence, since it is pure actuality, is identical with its thinking. Alexander is not denying this identity claim, he is merely stating that in the case of God, and only in that case, the substance necessarily possesses its own actualization or fulfillment. And this is the sense of the term in a range of other authors, whether they are using it for God, intelligence, or even mundane realities. Plotinus says of the one that his willing to be himself by his own agency is concurrent with his being what he wills, and his will and he are one. Porphyry uses the term to describe the relation of the intelligible, paradigmatic virtues to their possessor, nous. So then it has become clear that there are four classes of virtues, those of the intellect which act as paradigms and are concurrent with its substance. A number of late Neoplatonists used the phrase for exactly Alexander's purposes, to state the relation between ousia and energeia among intelligible beings, but it is not only used for intelligible realities. The 5th century philosopher Hierocles explains that the heroes come to be as sons of the gods, not by mortal intercourse, but like a light which is concurrent with the substance of the illuminating body. Similarly, Simplicius says that, at the same time that the fire came to be, it possessed upward movement as a concurrent with its substance. To summarize, we find Basil's phrase, synthromon ti ousia, and synonyms being used by late ancient philosophers for the relation between nous and its actuality, between the Neoplatonic one and its volition, or its analogue of what we call volition, and between a simple body such as fire and its light, as well as its upward motion, that is, between fire's substance and its inherent powers. What kind of relations are these? In each case the two items stand in a necessary relationship, such that if one exists, so does the other. If there is fire, there is light. If, ex hypothesi, there is light, there is fire. The relation is also simultaneous. There is no moment when fire does not illuminate or travel upwards. But despite this close relation, it would be mistaken to say that being fire and being light, or being the element that moves upwards, are the same properties. They always go together, but they are not identical with one another. The case is less clear with the Neoplatonic theories of nous and the one. The two are held to be identical with whatever they possess or with their activity. The terminology of concurrence can be used for either relations of identity or of non-identical but necessarily coextensive items. Neither interpretation is constrained by the mere appearance of the term. This example attributed to Simplicius is crucial because it is used directly by St Gregory of Nyssa while speaking of the divine power. There is no question he could have happened to use the same image by pure coincidence. As an educated man, he was drawing on the philosophical context of his own time. The likeliest explanation is that both St Gregory and Simplicius after him were drawing this particular metaphor from a common source. Thus it is in the Catechetical Discourse that he writes, "First, then, the all-powerful nature being strong to descend even to the humiliation of humanity is more proof of power than great and supernatural miracles. For accomplishing something great and lofty by the divine power is somehow natural and in order, and it would not sound strange to say that every created thing in the world, and all that is comprehended beyond sensory phenomena, is constituted by the power of God, his will itself given being according to his good pleasure. But the descent to our humiliation is a superabundant example of power, in no way hindered by things contrary to its nature. For, as it is a property of the essence of fire to tend upward, and someone would not deem the natural activity of a flame worthy of wonder, but if he should see the flame flowing downward, like heavy bodies, such a thing is regarded with wonder, how fire both remains fire and exceeds nature in the manner of its motion, being carried downwards. So too the greatness of the heavens and the rays of its luminaries, and the arrangement of the universe and the continuous economy of existing things, do not demonstrate the divine and transcendent power, so much as the condescension to the infirmity of our nature, how the lofty came to be in humiliation, and is seen in humiliation, and does not descend from the lofty, how divinity entwining with human nature both becomes this and that. If I may draw a connection here, it seems to me that the analogy of a fire and its motion as concurrent but not absolutely identical is being used by St Gregory here to explain how God can act in modes which are distinct but not separate from his essence. The Incarnation is a supreme example of this, because it is so wonderful that God should will to act in this particular manner, even as he wills it from all eternity. Elsewhere in the same work, St Gregory uses the language of concurrence, synthromon, in this case to refer to the unity and distinction of God's intention, will, and power. As he writes, "The Word of God, being something essential and hypostatic, was demonstrated to be himself both God and Word, who has embraced all creative power, and even more is power itself, and has an impulse to all good, and accomplishes all that he wills by having power concurrent with his intention, whose will and work is the life of existing things, by whom man was also led into life, having been adorned in godlike manner with all the best things."